announcements, and then we'll actually go into the panel. So some of the announcements that we have is, as I mentioned earlier when I invited everyone to pack the space and to come up and fill the rows, we're really trying to establish an intimate environment and a conversation amongst friends. So if there is any press in attendance, the conversation is off the record. If you want to follow up with any of us afterwards, we are happy to connect you to our media teams, but this was an agreement that we set up ahead of time. It's also important for folks to know that I use she, ella pronouns. I'm a Mexicana and a former teacher turned community organizer. And I've spent more than a decade focusing on the issues that my students and former students face as they grow up from third graders to now they're 18, 19, and 20 respectively. And at Planned Parenthood Action Fund, I have the pleasure of leading the strategic partnerships team at the Action Fund. Our vision is to achieve an intersectional movement for reproductive freedom and equality. And very specifically, this means that we focus on immigration and democracy as cross-movement issues that we know are inextricable from bodily autonomy. Also, criminalization, which is an emerging issue in reproductive justice that impacts all of our patients, and particularly our Black, Latinx, AANHPI, Indigenous, and other marginalized identities. That our patients who already face healthcare racism and barriers to that are systemic, that are exacerbated by the new policing in our field. But this is why that we have invited our compañeros and our allies who are sitting up here together with us today, because they work on immigration, on voting rights, on reproductive justice, and also because as people who are organizers specifically, we are invested in long-term power building beyond the election. So that's why when you look at the title of the session today, it's not just about winning elections, but it's also about building power. And if you'll allow, when you hear the word power, it's important to note that in Spanish, power is poder. Say it with me, poder. Poder. Poder in Spanish is actually a verb that means I can. So if I say yo puedo correr, it means I can run. So when you apply the word power in an organizing capacity, and for the purpose of our conversation today, power means the capacity to act. And in some cases, whole communities to be able to act and have agency. So welcome to our conversation today, and again, this conversation is off the record for any press who are here, and for you who are accompanying us in person and also virtually, welcome and bienvenidos. So to my friends and compañeros, a lot of public attention has been dominated by the presidential election and also around fear of another potential Trump presidency. We know that fear can be a particularly powerful motivator, but also an inhibitor for action. So before we dive directly into how to address that, it's important for us to know what motivates you, because that informs your answers to the questions around fear and also motivating to act. So by way of introduction, can you please all start by sharing your name, your pronouns, the organizations that you work for, and perhaps more importantly, an anecdote and or story that demonstrates the intersection of immigration, voting rights, and reproductive freedom in your public leadership and or identity. That's a very dense question, so please feel free to answer as you wish.
All right, I will start. Hello, everyone. Good to see you all. My name is Beulah Osweke. My pronouns are she, her. The organization that I represent is New Voices for Reproductive Justice. We're in Pennsylvania and Ohio. And an anecdote I'd like to share at the intersection of all the things that Angela shared is my parents are immigrants from Nigeria. And so they came to America in the 80s. And so as a child of immigrants, I now realize that I have the philosophy to not want to waste their sacrifice, to want to work really, really hard. So working hard is instilled in who I am as a person, and also because in Nigeria we're very communal. I also believe in communities working hard, which is why I gravitated to this work, I believe. And we were talking intentionally about the intersections. I actually had a lot of loyalty and care for Nigeria. That was really taught to us. I was actually a Nigerian in Texas, so anyone who knows a Nigerian or Texas, we're both very arrogant people, so I'm double that, okay? But I remember the first time I actually had a shift in my mind as an adult and cared about America was when I was doing organizing work and doing electoral voting work. And I was like, oh, I actually have a say in what happens in this nation. And so that was really important for me to kind of have that aha moment, because I think sometimes people in this country assume everyone cares about America in the same ways, and that is not true. That care, that trust, that desire to want to have impact on this nation has to be earned and developed and cultivated. For new mothers in Nigeria versus America. And she told me that when she gave birth to me, because I was interviewing her for something I was writing, that she gave birth to me on a Monday and went back to school Tuesday morning. And I was shocked and disgusted, and she was laughing. And when I started asking her questions about that, she was like, yeah, here in this country, it's very high pace. There's not a lot of community care. People don't show up, right? They come and then they're gone. And she talked about in her village how the entire village will come in and support a new mother for months, rub their feet, give them food, care for them. So it really put into perspective for me how individualism is so harmful in this country that my mother had to birth me on Monday and go to school 8 o'clock in the morning the next day.
Thank you, Beulah. Hi, everyone. My name is Michelle Ming. I'm the political director at United We Dream Action, the largest immigrant youth-led organizing network in the country. Yeah. I am a fellow child of immigrants, also from Texas, and I have this running joke with my friends that to be really annoying, I'll just start every sentence with as a child of immigrants, I blah blah blah. But I think it really is genuinely a core part of my identity. I've learned so much from my parents about how to think about how I am perceived and how I move in this country. And I think the biggest wake-up call to me, I guess, was growing up, honestly, in Houston. We have a huge Asian American population in Sugar Land, and I really didn't think about my identity truly until I got to college and moved to New York, and I saw people who had never seen an Asian in their life, and I was like, oh, whoa, I'm actually not like a lot of people in this country. And I think growing up, my parents always saw citizenship as their highest form of aspiration, saw assimilation as the biggest thing to aspire to, and that meant citizenship. It meant being able to work in this country without fearing, having to move back to China where they're originally from. It meant being able to vote. And so I went through all of my teenage years super excited to be able to vote because I knew that it was something that I didn't grow up seeing my parents do. My parents got their citizenship around the same time that I was able to vote for the first time. It was in 2015. So the first election that we voted in was together in the 2016 election. We all know how that turned out, not well. And it was then that I realized that actually, citizenship might not be the end-all, be-all thing that will make my parents safe in the way that I thought it would. And so that kind of changed my entire, I thought I was gonna go to, I was an econ major, and then I thought maybe I'll go to law school. But then I entered the world of advocacy through working for the in-house law department at Planned Parenthood, and it changed my entire view of what I could do with my life to protect our communities. And so that's all led me to be here where I am today, working on behalf of immigrant young people across this country. Yeah, that's my story.
Thank you for sharing. Hello, everybody. Buenas tardes. My name is Raquel Cruz Juarez. I use she, her, ella. I hail from fabulous Las Vegas, Nevada. Some Nevadans in the room. And I am My 9 to 5 is a senior director of constituency campaigns. But what does that actually mean? I have the privilege of supporting the development of our Black organizing, Latinx organizing, and young organizing work nationwide at Planned Parenthood. And it's really dope people, really dope work. And what I loved about this is I'm an immigrant, so I love that immigration is like, it's constant, right? So you have children of immigrants. My children are going to be a child of an immigrant, and I'm an immigrant. I'm going to take it to storytelling. I wrote a story that I have permission to share, and I'm just going to go into it. Over 30 years ago, an immigrant braved it all and moved from her home country to New York City. Fresh out of high school, she began working as a nanny to the rich, the kind of rich with cream-colored apartments, never a hair out of place, the kind you see in Sex and the City. As an immigrant, everything was new, everything was full of wonderment, including the idea of getting papers. She met a nice man who promised she wouldn't have to be his wife, but they could marry so she could hurry and get her papers. Unfortunately, on trigger warning, there's some domestic violence, that proved to be a lie. Her new partner promised her safety and emotional support. This promise quickly became a nightmare filled with domestic violence. This man sexually assaulted her and she became pregnant. Everything was uncertain at the time, but she was sure of one thing. She didn't want to be pregnant and tied to someone who would more than likely perpetuate the cycle of violence. She flipped through the yellow pages, found a compassionate, independent reproductive health care center, and made an appointment without hesitation. The next day, on her way to work, on her way to be a nanny, she stopped at the clinic and got an abortion. She left the clinic with mixed emotions, thankful to be in a country where access to abortion is protected, but also with fear of the repercussions from her violent partner. She recalled going to work right after her abortion. She couldn't afford to take the day off. She would always be thankful to her employer who took empathy and allowed her to rest for the rest of the day. It took her a while to leave that relationship, but throughout the next year after she left her home, she stopped at that reproductive health care center every month and picked up her birth control pills. She feared that he would find out, so she would tape the pills to the toilet tank lid and every day would lift it and carefully and quietly take that pill. That woman was my mom. That person is my mom. Oh, thank you. And I have permission to share that story because she told me that story while she was, I don't know if you all have this experience, but my mom became my most fearless volunteer leader when I was an organizer in Las Vegas. And we were at a tabling event. It was like a community fair in a zip code that had high Latinx, high immigrant populations. And in the middle of the Vegas heat, she decided to tell me the story for the very first time. And I was both so shocked and I was like tearing up because it's the first time that I saw my mom as more than just my mom, but as one of the people that either Planned Parenthood or independent reproductive health care centers serve every single day. And she told me that it was because of Planned Parenthood and the storytelling work that we had that she felt that I was a safe space to tell that story. You know, for a very long time, I got my feet wet at immigration, in organizing through immigration. I was registering voters when I couldn't vote myself. And I often would question, am I at the right organization? Am I doing the right thing? Because I'm an immigrant. I could have an elevated voice in the immigrant space. But then I knew this is where I belong too. Like, the access to reproductive care is an immigrant fight as well. And her story really solidified not only like the generations of pain that maybe my mom carried, but also why I'm here. And it's been so grateful. I've been so grateful to that story and to her because last cycle, we had a really great person running for a governor in Nevada, and she actually like penned an LTE for him and shared that story. And I was like, wow, look at my mom, you know, like an immigrant who the stories that y'all told about your families resonated too, like assimilation. Maybe some of us have broken Spanish because of that assimilation. Maybe some of us still, like when I became a citizen, it was really hard for me to let go of like that love that I had for Guatemala, where we come from. And so that story to me demonstrates like why I'm still here, why I do this work, and why she continues to be like that engaged voter and supporter.
Wow. Hi, everybody. My name is Leslie Prohl. I'm the Senior Director of Voting Rights for the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights. We are the nation's oldest and largest civil rights coalition. We have about 240 organizations, and one of our primary priorities is to sustain a multiracial democracy in which everyone's voice is heard. I'm going to come at this conversation from the voting rights perspective, but I just wanted to say thank you for inviting me. We are very dedicated to lifting up the intersectionality of every single issue through the voting rights lens, because we believe that the right to vote is foundational and protects all other freedoms and rights, and that the pathway to meaningful change on any issue is through the ballot box. So I am from California, born and bred, and I had never set foot in the South until I got a federal clerkship in Birmingham, Alabama. And I was very interested in doing civil rights, so I thought, what better place to go? Yes, it was a culture shock, having grown up in California, but it was a tremendous experience for me. I ended up staying for 10 years and doing civil rights law, and I just had, amazing lawyers around me. I ended up practicing law and doing trials with Rosa Parks' lawyer and Martin Luther King's lawyer, who is still alive today at 93 and still practicing law. And I wanted to say, I'm very motivated, even though I do a lot of national work now, by the clients that I had down there and the people that we are empowering every day who we do not know who they are. And I wanted to just give one vignette about a case I worked on when I got there. Alabama has 67 counties, and forever, the way that county commissioners, who are really run a lot of things about where they're going to put a hospital, where a school is going to go, there's a lot of local decision making, obviously, that happens at the local level that really affects everybody's daily lives. Forever, county commissioners were elected through at-large districts. Say there was 5 county commissioners and it was an at-large election. If there were 60% white people in the county and 40% people of color, every single time those 5 elected officials were going to be white, because there's so much racially polarized voting. And the lawyer that I worked with, who was the best voting rights lawyer in Alabama, had brought a case saying, this is a violation of the Voting Rights Act because you're not letting communities of color elect candidates of their choice. And we ended up winning and getting a settlement that applied to 67 counties, so that there were actually district elections where you had heavily African-American districts, heavily population of color districts, were able to elect their leaders and get 1 or 2 and sometimes 3 county commissioners. And I think about that all the time, because in this very polarized discussion about voting rights and everything that happens at the state level, and I'm going to talk to you a little about that later, we have to remember that a lot of the battles are at the local level. And so when you go out to vote and when you go out to spread the word about voting, don't just talk about Congress. Don't just talk about, the Supreme Court justices on the state courts, which I hope you are, but talk about the local elections for, we like to say prosecutor, judge, county commissioner, dog catcher. Everything is important, and so we've got to make sure that people remember that. Thank you.
Thank you all for sharing your stories. That was very intentional. You can look up their fabulous biographies on LinkedIn, but you don't always get to hear what motivates people to act. So I appreciate you sharing, especially the level of vulnerability that you all shared. The first question that I have for you outside of this introductory question is, as election day looms, what is keeping you up at night?
Yeah, I can take that first. So I think it's no secret that our current president, Joe Biden, does not have a good record on immigration, along with a lot of other progressive issues, not progressive, just issues that affect people everywhere, every issue. Our communities are very aware of how Biden has not done enough, and we're also very aware that there's still a long time until Election Day. Like, I am already so sick of talking about the election, but we still have like 4 months of it. So there are a lot of opportunities for him to do better and do more that we need to push for. We've already seen the massive uprisings of young people across this country on the genocide in Gaza, on a lot of different issues. And we also need to keep in mind that we're seeing right-wing extremist legislation being enacted right now across the country that's harming our communities. But there are things that we can do from now until election, that we have been doing, that we will continue to do from now until election day and past election day to ensure that we can hold Biden accountable to promises that he made to us a long time ago, and to also block the encroaching fascism that's happening all around the country. One of the things that, is also keeping me up at night in a good way is like the direct action that we can take on the ballot in places like Arizona. There's a really exciting ballot measure there to enshrine abortion into the state constitution. But there's also an anti-immigrant ballot measure on the ballot that will essentially give state and local police the authority to enforce national immigration laws, which just means more policing of our communities. And so that's something that we're communicating to people. That's something I think about all the time, is that these direct policies are things that we should be working on, mobilizing people to either combat or to vote for.
I think for me, I'm taking it beyond the candidacy and looking deeper into organizing. I don't want to be in the same place 4 years from now. I remember being a young organizer like a decade ago, and I had something to be hopeful for. I had mentors that inspired me, and I know that there's mentors that are inspiring, but I see my community both really exhausted from organizing for the same people that let us down every single time. I see organizers with bright ideas embedded in either large organizations or structures that don't allow them to thrive and actually be experts of their community. And then I see us getting complacent, and that is not what this room of organizers can be. And so for me, it's like thinking about the long-term piece. And because I work specifically with Black, Latinx, and young people, I think what keeps me up at night regarding those communities is, let's just name it, right? Like Latinx communities are turning Republican and conservative. And why is that? We are excluding Black men from the conversation. We are asking young people to tell us what to do, but then we don't create main spaces and stages for them. We have the solutions. I just think that we're becoming a bit complacent. And I say we as a movement, not just us as individuals. And I don't think that we can continue being the mechanism for the Democratic Party if we actually want change. Like, they are an agent of change, but they're not the only change. And to your point, Leslie, I think what keeps me up at night is how to then localize these issues and these fights for folks. And since you mentioned the ballot initiative in Arizona and in other states like my home state too, I think that that's where we start. We remember why we started doing this organizing work, which is about the issue, not about the candidate. We remember that elections are peaks and they're important moments to plug people in and to ask them to understand it. But we also remember that people come at it from a different space. Thinking of myself as an immigrant, I still struggle to understand what a ballot initiative is. How do you think people outside of this room that we're asking them to go vote for a ballot initiative is feeling? Overwhelmed, underwhelmed, uninspired, angry. These are real things. So it keeps me up at night that my neighbor next door had to move because overnight in 1 month, his rent went up by $500. Like, that's not okay. And so I think for me, it is a Trump presidency, but it is this complacency that I'm feeling from our movement. It is this lack of space for, I see these all over documents and places. Why BIPOC focus? Are we BIPOC focus? Because why BIPOC focus means handing over the mic, giving up some of our power, and I think that we're really reverting back to something that I've actually never experienced in the movement before. So sometimes I feel like I lack enthusiasm, so I know that an average voter that doesn't have access to these spaces also lacks enthusiasm. So that's what keeps me up at night.
Michelle and Raquel, you both remind me of an organizing principle which states, no permanent friends, no permanent enemies, only permanent interests. Anybody else want to take this question?
Yeah, I think what keeps me up at night is normalizing our suffering. Babies not getting what they need. people having to vote for two people that are both accused of sexual assault. I mean, I'm just being honest. What keeps me up at night is that the Overton window is going so far right that it terrifies me. That some of the conversations we're having with people who are supposed to be on our side of progressives are dehumanizing, are utilizing the labor and care and rage of Black people as if we're not human. It's disgusting. What keeps me up at night is our organizations not properly utilizing our resources and pouring to the very people whose plight we utilize and monetize to get additional funding. So when and where are we gonna stop doing the same as usual and actually put our feet to the ground with a lot of the rhetoric that we recite? So I really just want better for us. I want better for our people. And as you can tell, it's a little bit enraging.
So what keeps me up at night is we are facing an existential crisis with this election, and I'm worried about whether people are going to be able to vote and have that vote count. And I just want to raise the Supreme Court here because I think they're just a tremendous threat to our democracy. And I wanted to ask the room, how many of you have heard of the Shelby County versus Holder decision that came out 11 years ago? That is still devastating our country. This is the case that destroyed the heart of the Voting Rights Act, where jurisdictions with histories of discrimination had to pre-clear any election change, had to send it to the Department of Justice to make sure it wasn't discriminatory. The Supreme Court knocked that out. So you had jurisdictions, particularly in the South, who were absolutely free to enact any voter suppression measure they wanted to and put it on the books before anybody could challenge it. And people do challenge it, but you're never going to catch up. What happened was it unleashed a tsunami of voter suppression, not just in the South, but everywhere. Nevada, Ohio, everywhere. And so we keep fighting these measures, and they keep coming at us, and it's causing cumulative harm. It's not just the bill they passed last year, that's the bill on top of the bill before. And I think we need to, all get ready to prepare to educate people to vote and how to vote. Make sure that people know those changes in the law. And the other thing I would say, voting discrimination changes over time. And it's not the same type of discrimination. We all heard about the 60s where people had to count jelly beans in a jar and recite provisions of the Constitution. Now it is ID laws. It is criminalizing providing assistance to voters. In Alabama, there's now a law in the book that if you drive your neighbor to help her file an absentee ballot, drop the ballot in a drop box, or vote absentee in a mailbox. If you drive your neighbor to do that, you could potentially get 10 years in prison because you are assisting somebody in filing an absentee ballot. End of story. And so there are very dark forces that we are up against. They keep changing the game. And finally, for purposes of this discussion, I want to make sure you all know about this rise in attacks on non-citizen voting. The House passed a bill yesterday that required people to provide proof of citizenship in order to register to vote. Thankfully, it's not going to get through Congress because of the Senate. But what it is doing is it's scaring immigrant communities from participating. It is putting burdens on them to find proof of citizenship, which is very hard to do in most cases, to provide that, to register, and even most importantly, they are sowing the ground for casting allegations of delegitimacy on the election results. Everything that they are doing right now is a setup for November so that they can say the integrity of the election is not there, and therefore we're going to go ahead and challenge the results. And so these are very scary times, and Yeah, we are not looking down the barrel right now of an election, but we need to be working every day to prepare.
Thank you. I think, Leslie, that is an excellent segue into something that I'm sure many people either at home or here have heard before, which is Project 2025. Can you raise your hand if you've heard of Project 2025? Looks like almost every hand in this room. If you have not, Project 2025 is a far-right presidential transition and policy project that lays out a series of plans for the next president. The initiative itself has over 100 right-wing partners, spearheaded by the Heritage Foundation. It has $22 million in funding, and in sum, it aims to comprehensively reshape the federal government and instill a wide-ranging slate of policies that would fundamentally reshape the country and, quote-unquote, institutionalize Trumpism. This is on top of the challenges that already exist that our panelists have spoken about. So as Project 2025 makes clear, Donald Trump and his allies are obsessed with controlling our bodies by interfering both at the ballot box and in our personal medical decisions. Banning abortion is a key part of the first promise that is in the text forward. And if you happen to take a gander at Project 2025, abortion is mentioned 199 times throughout its 887 pages. The sections on immigration and democracy are also horrifying, but they're also very clear. Now, if you're listening to us today, you might be like, whoa, why would you start with a very heavy question like that? Now we're all feeling scared. I asked you what keeps you up at night. This comes from another organizing principle, which states, meet people where they're at, but don't leave them there. So with that in mind, I'm gonna ask you another question. We know what the other side is wanting and what they're planning. What kind of world do we want? Beulah, would you like to start us off?
Yes. So one of the things that I enjoy about the reproductive justice movement, one of the principles is we deserve the right to build safe and sustainable communities, right? And so that's what hooked me in, because all of the justice work that I've done up until that point was talking about what we're fighting against and really fixating on injustice. And reproductive justice was the first framework that I came across that said, this is the world that we're fighting for, this is what we need to do. And I'd never before done reverse engineering within an organizing context. One of my favorite quotes is, once you're free from, what are you free to? And I'm a former basketball coach, so I'm a coach for life. And I think that as organizers, oftentimes, we're on the defense all the time, all the time. We're always on the defense, and it's very draining. It's emotionally draining, right? Like, to have to defend something, it takes a lot more energy than to be more in a creative space on the offensive. And so I encourage us all to spend just as much time thinking about the world that we want to create. And oftentimes when I'm talking with my RJ colleagues, we talk about building new worlds, very intentionally with an S, because we can create worlds in how we engage with each other on a very small interpersonal level. We can create worlds in doing people right in private when no one can see you. I'm extremely sure that we have the ability to create the worlds that we desire if we pivot and reassign who is able to build community, who is able to build power, and we don't seek permission from institutions that do not have our best interest in mind. So I'll stop there because I don't want to talk too much. But I really do believe that we all have the power to build realities that we can't even deem right now if we shift our focus and think about what is possible instead of what we're fighting up against.
Yeah, I can also take a stab at this question. Beulah, I love your approach of like specifying that there are like multiple worlds that people can coexist in, because I love the idea of like abundance as a principle that we organize around, rather than like competition and scarcity and taking things from each other. We can live our lives without like hurting other people, which is something that a lot of our opponents out there seem to forget or are actively like trying to teach us not to do. So I think what we're doing at United We Dream Action is trying to build a pro-immigrant future. That means it means a lot. It's really expansive in that it's a future where simply everyone is safe to live without fear. And it means that our rights are protected. Everyone's rights to control our own bodies, our rights to move and to stay. That means being able to live somewhere without feeling like you're forcibly being pushed into another environment where you don't feel safe. Our rights to participate in our democracy, regardless of immigration status. I referenced earlier the fact that, like, oftentimes in immigrant communities, in the immigration organizing space, we think about voting as like the end-all be-all, or citizenship as the end-all be-all like target that we're hoping for. And that is just one step in the process. Pathway to citizenship is absolutely something that we want, but it's not enough. And there's so much more to be able to engage immigrant youth in this country before, during, and after the process of becoming citizens that we really want to emphasize as a way to like engage people in this country, because we want a world that is inclusive to everyone, in a country that doesn't exclude you from the democracy that you deserve to participate in. And we also know that a lot of these threats that we've talked about and what's keeping us up at night are compounded for people who are undocumented, who don't have that layer of protection of being citizens in this country. But our vision is one that highlights care through action. It's one where we really believe that using our electoral power, our political power, to vote on behalf of our communities, to act on behalf of our communities, is really important.
They mentioned it 199 times, you say? It's crazy. You know, abortion is the it girl issue, this cycle, and I hate saying that just because a lot of us have been working on reproductive rights and justice work for many years, and welcome to the party. And I say that in the nicest way possible, because for many years, reproductive health care rights and justice advocates have been saying what every political candidate is saying now. And so it does anger me that for a while our communities were saying this is important: access to abortion, access to a healthy reproductive life, access to deciding what my family looks like, when to have a family, is a fundamental building block for any human being. And it's funny you mentioned Project 2025, because the first time that I heard that, it was through my dad. He asked me, do you know about Project 2025? And I think I might have seen an email come through about it, but how many emails do we get every day? He actually heard about it through YouTube. You know, my dad is that elder Japanese American that's like on watching YouTube every day, and so I can't believe that I heard it first from him. And I say that because I think about him as an elder, and I think about my niece Josie as a 10-year-old, and the kind of worlds, to your point, Vila, of what the kind of worlds that they deserve. And for me, it's just about essentially having access to not just healthcare, but a bus stop near my healthcare center, access to childcare. I think about creating a family. I'm trying to start a family, and I have panic about what does it mean to be working, granted, yes, at Planned Parenthood, but be working and not be able to see my child grow how I want to, or will my husband have enough paid time off to be with our child and bond as well? I want that kind of world, and I want us in this election to deliver a win that is really for our people and not beholden to political parties. And I also want reproductive health care and abortion to continue being the it girl kind of issue, not to take away from other issues, but we need to not just frame it as a political win, because I think that that's what's frustrating as someone who has been working at Planned Parenthood for a while, that people are only talking about abortion now because it's a winnable thing. No, we should be talking about abortion because it's a fundamental act, it's a right that everybody should have. And so that's the kind of world that I want. And like I mentioned earlier, I don't want to be here in 4 years again, y'all. I do not want to be here exasperated, exhausted, upset, and angry at the choices that we are putting before our communities. I'm embarrassed. Like that, I'm frankly embarrassed that I have to go and knock doors for some folks.
I think this is such a great question. What is our affirmative vision? In the voting rights world, we play defense far too often. We're always on on our heels. It's because of this decision I told you about. It's because of the onslaught of the voter suppression bills we continue to see. And we need to talk about what we want our democracy to look like and how inclusive we want it to be. And one of the things that we're doing is 11 years after that Shelby County decision, we're still trying to fix that Supreme Court case. In the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act that we got introduced in Congress about 6 months after that decision came down, we've been working on that now for 10 years, and we're still working on it. And people say to me, why are you talking about that now? This Congress is never going to pass that bill. And I say, because we need it. We continue to need it, and we're going to be fighting for it until we get it. And if we're not talking about it in the downtime when it comes to who's in the leadership, we're not going to be ready for when we get that leadership, and we're not going to make that leadership happen if we only are talking about it after we elect a Congress that's going to pass it. We need to be talking about it now, and we're bringing it back into the conversation. John Lewis Act will prevent discrimination. It will block that discrimination. I told you that the Supreme Court undid that procedure. There's also a big bill called the Freedom to Vote Act that's going to expand voting access, that's going to make it across the country, you're going to be able to early vote for 2 weeks. You're going to have same-day registration. You're going to have automatic voting. You're going to have all these things that we should be doing to make voting easier in federal elections. And so it's going to apply to every state. And no state is going to have a state process and a federal process. So we're trying to get this expansive bill passed too. And I will say this, you know, this affects everything we're talking about. It is no coincidence to me that the Dobbs decision came out of Mississippi, okay? That's where it came from. It was the state of Mississippi that asked the Supreme Court to overrule Roe versus Wade, okay? Mississippi is the most misrepresented state in the state legislature and in Congress. It is the state with the highest percentage of black residents of any state in the country. And not since Reconstruction has it elected a black official statewide. That is how bad the voter suppression is down there. And so if we get these voting rights bills passed, everything else will flow because the Mississippi State Legislature will look very different, and we will not have an attorney general or a solicitor general in that state who felt free to have the temerity and just the, you know, I don't know, even the brazenness to tell the Supreme Court, actually, we're asking you to overturn the decision. So I just want to connect those dots here that we're not only talking about Congress, we're talking about the things that, thank goodness, there's these state referendums on abortion, but we need new legislatures in these states to try to get everything moving that we want to happen.
Leslie, your coraje or your righteous indignation is very contagious. That's why I was like tapping on the table over here. Due to time, I'm gonna cut, this is for our panelists, I'm gonna cut one of these questions by combining them. So you can choose whether to answer either of these two coming up. The first option is, as organizers, we often talk about the world as it is versus the world as it should be. We organize to get from the world as it is to the world as it should be. When you put this idea into the context of an election cycle, it gets complicated. For those of you who work on Get Out to Vote, how do you balance speaking authentically to supporters while also motivating them to vote? That's one question. As you're choosing your adventure as you answer these questions, the other one is, what is one thing that you think will make cross-movement organizing, coordination, and power building easier that people here today or listening at home can take away with them? So I will toss it to each of you to answer either of those questions. Or you can smush them in your answer and answer both.
Okay. I'm going to try to smush, and for the first question, if anyone doesn't know about narrative strategy and cultural strategy, Please look it up. It's where we're simply embedding the ideology that we talk about in justice and into what people do every day. So that's cultural strategy and narrative strategy. For the other question, I think that it's possible for us to build power outside of the limitations of our electoral system. And I think it's really important for us to recognize that and take that seriously. So another one of my favorite quotes, a lot of favorite quotes. One of my favorite quotes as well is, if you have come here to help me, you're wasting your time. If you have come here because you recognize that our liberation is bound to each other, then let's get to work. The way that I approach this work, I came through a faith-based organizing lens, and we did racial justice work, economic justice work, and then I stumbled into reproductive justice. I never cared about having a child. I never desired to have a child. And so I was like, why should I care about abortion? I'm just going to be honest there. I share this as often as I can, because once somebody connected the attacks to bodily autonomy and abortion access in Philadelphia, somebody can, like, we have a mayor right now that is a proponent of stop and frisk. And so a police officer can think that you look suspicious and ram your body up against a building and frisk you and do whatever police officers do. And they said that that is an attack on our bodily autonomy. And they said abortion access is about power and control. And so when someone told me that abortion access and bodily autonomy is about power and control, something went off in my head. And I started seeing all these linkages. So I now cannot understand siloed work. As we're talking about the atrocities that are happening across the globe, people are urging us to think globally and act locally. And so a lot of times when I hear rhetoric from progressives and liberals that express interest and concern for people in the global South, that it stays with just expressing interest and concerns and not organizing and supporting people that are starving in your backyard, it concerns me. The very atrocities that we can articulate that are happening over there are happening right here. It is those of us that are privileged and don't have to navigate those challenges that get to just pontificate about this as opposed to doing something about it. So I myself try to charge myself with the daily task of taking this work seriously and not just relying on my intellectualism or allowing for my job to be my only venue of organizing and caring for my people. And all I ask is that we do the same here and take that as a personal charge, not just for the sake of our jobs or because it's the topic of the day, because we recognize that all of our liberation is bound to one another.
Yeah, thank you, Beulah, for reminding us that we have a responsibility not just to attend conferences like this, but then to actually take this back to our daily lives as well. I'm also gonna smush these two questions together of like, how do you speak authentically to your base, and what you think would make cross-movement organizing and coordination easier, because I think it goes hand in hand. For us, our base is young people of color, immigrant youth, and our thing is just that we trust them. We trust them to understand things. We trust them when we go to them honestly, that they'll make the connections. What we've seen, and what I've been really heartened to see, especially among my friends who are all like Gen Z, is that they are making connections on their own through Instagram, through TikTok. They're participating in pro-Palestine rallies without me having to like push them in a way that I feel like I might have like 5 years ago. I think people are waking up to the issues and being more involved in a more easily accessible way. They're on their phones all the time. They are connecting the dots for themselves, and our responsibility is to give them like correct information and more pathways to act, and more support to act. And so I would say, going out of this room, think about the ways that you're supporting young leadership, young people who are already taking action in our communities, and supporting them and giving them resources to take more action.
I just want to give a quick shout out to the Black Organizing Program at Planned Parenthood to give you an example of what we're doing to authentically talk to communities. 2 years ago, the Black Organizing Program at Planned Parenthood said, hey, we're excluding Black men from this conversation. Our work is very gendered. What can we do? They took action. They did research. They partnered with Black male-led organizations in Texas and in the South. And they have been doing some really dope Black male huddles. And what these are is like Black male spaces for Black men to just talk about reproductive health care and abortion. And the work that they've been doing has been so transformative. And sometimes it feels like an uphill battle in an organization like Planned Parenthood, where we've been around for over 100 years. And only in the last 15 years has there actually been a wide BIPOC dedicated space for organizing. So we're in an up against hill battle within our organization and also in the movement. So that's like a space that they have had to prove that, unfortunately, but they're actually doing this great work and now they're being trusted. And it's hard to say that, but I'm just like inspired by that work that they're doing and like bringing in communities that maybe we didn't think about. And it's true, we have gendered that space, but I think that that's been so inspirational, and seeing it play out in the GOTV space and the plans that they have coming up for the fall at HBCUs and homecoming. Like, that's cool, deep work that, frankly, if we wouldn't have Black leaders at Planned Parenthood, that would not have been the case. And then as far as what's one thing that you would make cross-movement organizing, coordination, and power building easier, I think it's just about really questioning like the specific personal choices that you make every day. When you go and have a partnership, are you eroding that power hunger and that want to be recognized in the work? You know, we see a lot of these partnerships that are very transactional, and just like erode that power. What does that mean? When we're actually liberating each other, it means that we're sharing resources, that we're sharing access, that we're sharing the mic. We don't have to always be listening to the same people. We don't have to be inviting the same people to the White House all the time. Like, let's make space for people that have never had access to that. And that's what I meant when I said earlier, you know, we talk about Gen Z, but we don't actually have Gen Zs on panels sometimes. So what are we talking about, y'all? So, and also the last thing too is like when I was saying that sometimes as an organizer, I'm lacking some inspiration and some hope. I cling on to a personal anecdote to keep me through those cloudy days. I cling on to the personal, to my niece, Josie, that doesn't know what the heck I do for work, but says things like, hey, can you take me to a civil rights? And that for her means, can you take me to a pride rally? Can you take me to meet, you know, the future vice president of the United States? And those moments, like if you can plug in the youth, even at 10 years, it's so important, because I remember last cycle she thought that Kamala Harris was running for president, not Joe Biden. And so that should tell you like where the youth is really looking.
So I'm so inspired by this panel, because we're not just talking in silos anymore, we're connecting the dots. And I wanted to recommend to you a new report from the National Partnership on Women and Families that is just absolutely excellent for connecting the right to reproductive freedom to voting rights. And it looks through the states and it documents that the states where abortion access has been diminished are those same states that are suppressing the vote. And it's a chapter and verse analysis of this. So you've got your ammo when you go out talking to people about how this is all connected. I would say for inspiration, I'm going to tell you, when I was in Alabama, I started going every year to the Selma to Montgomery March. It happens every year, and on the big anniversaries, a lot of people come down and take pictures in front of the bridge, and the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma. And I was there in 2020. And as I said, we're still trying to fix the Shelby County decision. And the bill we've got to fix it is the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. And by that time, John Lewis, who was beaten on that bridge in 1965, which led to the passage ultimately of the Voting Rights Act, John Lewis was very, very ill. And he had cancer. And we hadn't heard from him in a while. And you start at the base of the bridge and everybody walks over together and sings, and you should do it once in your life if you haven't done it. It's absolutely amazing. And so we were all going up the bridge, and the walking just completely stopped. And that doesn't really happen. I've done this a number of times, because you just keep going and then you go down. And we're like, what's going on? Did somebody get sick? And, you know, there were kind of all these rumors. About 10 feet away from me, John Lewis rises up on a stand that they had brought for him. And he was incredibly ill and ailing. But he got himself on that bridge, probably from the other side, and stood up and said to us, Never give up, never give in, and keep your eyes on the prize. And the fact that it was him saying that, and he did that on that bridge, which was so symbolic and significant, that's what motivates me. Because I'm telling you, this is not easy what we do. And you have to, every day you got to get up and get out of bed, and you got to have something pulling you out of bed. And I think that a lot of us remember him doing that. His whole career was dedicated to protecting the vote. And we're continuing his battle in his honor, inspired by those words.
Dang, I forgot what I was going to say listening to you. What was I going to say? Oh, yes. So I think that our panelists gave us very clear lessons that I will summarize for you in two ways. One, some organizing principles, and two, some clear calls to actions, because a good organizer always provides a next step for people. The first that I heard from Beulah when she talked about narrative, it recalls that power, there's four types of power. Power, poder, say it with me, poder, is the capacity to act. So in its four types, there's power of position, power of organized people, power of organized money, but also influence. And so addressing all of these issues and their connection points through narrative change gets at that power of position. I see the person in the yellow hat nodding, so that means that I explained that properly. Thank you. The other thing that I heard our panelists say is something to the effect of another organizing principle that states those who are closest to the pain should be closest to the power. That is another organizing principle, which leads us to a third, which I also heard our panelists mention in their anecdotes, which is stay within the experience of your leaders when you're designing tactics. And finally, I would say these principles that I've shared today, the credit of who those belong to is the PICO National Network, currently called Faith in Action. They used to be called People Improving Communities Through Organizing. That's where Beulah and I got our training as organizers from. So that's where those are from. They're called PICO Organizing Principles. And with the calls to action, we have a QR code that we invite you to take a picture of. It will take you to a Google Doc that is completely unbranded because it's truly a collection of current calls to action that all of our organizations are inviting you to partake in. For Planned Parenthood Action Fund, we have a petition that is a C4 petition that we're asking people to sign. It's a supporter-facing petition. It's something that we are leveraging in a coalition called Abortion Access Now. It's a new coalition of lots of organizations that are working to make sure that we have the federal right and access restored if we can get through this election cycle. Michelle, do you want to tell us about what's on there for United We Dream?
Yeah, so I would urge everyone to go to the youthagenda.org and endorse the Youth Agenda. It is a product of a lot of youth organizations in the space, including us, Sunrise Movement, and March for Our Lives, and Gen Z for Change. It's a comprehensive policy agenda that we want to hold elected officials to make sure that they deliver on their promises.
And Beulah, would you like to talk about what you've put on the call to action for New Voices for Reproductive Justice?
Yes, to keep it a stack, I really don't know. But please go there and see. I'm sure our donation button is there, so please give us some shmoney. But also, if anything I've said is of interest to you, we are in Ohio and Pennsylvania. We participated in the Issue 1 work. And so again, if you know anyone that's in Ohio or Pennsylvania interested in community organizing, policy and advocacy, and integrated voter engagement, I have my business cards with me, so I'm proud of that. So please come, and we'd love to share more with you.
Thank you all. The last thing that I will take with you is I invite everybody to also listen to the two questions that our panelists posed today. One being, what is it that you're free to do? That was from Beulah, as we talk about what we're against and what's oppressing us, inviting us to ask ourselves, what are we free to do? And then finally, looking around this room at one another, because we often use the word co-conspirators or conspirators, but don't actually know what that means. And if you'll allow me one last teacherism, conspire in Latin is twofold. Con is with, and spirare means breathe. So when you put con with spirare, which is to conspire, it means to breathe together. So take that with you this afternoon, apply all of our calls to action, and think about how it is that we're breathing together, not just figuratively, but politically. And thank you so much for your time today.